Is there any way to help someone who has an inflated ego or is self-righteous, always sure that their perspective is correct, and usually judges others unfavorably? Is there a way to help them recognize that issue so that they can work on it? I suppose there are three questions. The first question is, what is your intent? Is your intent to help that person or to get back at that person because of a fault that they have that bothers you? If your intent is to help that person, then maybe there's room for a conversation. But if the intent is that that person bothers you and it's sort of trying to even the score by rubbing their fault in their face, I don't think that's helpful, and I don't think that that's correct. Assuming that your intention is to help the person and it's not about how that person is hurting you. The second question is, can that person be helped? And the true answer to that question is that these kinds of questions, these kinds of issues, a person is only helped if he wants to help himself. And a person only helps himself if he recognizes the flaw and the fault. Midei serois in another person are the other person's business. And you need to do what you do not to let them hurt you. But in terms of correcting that midah ra in the other person, the critical thing is not to give them the information. The critical thing is to give them the information in a way that can actually help them. And I think that's very difficult to do. And there's a lot of factors. And one of the most basic factors is it depends who you are. In other words, they need to be able to take the criticism from you. And for them to take the criticism from you, and it sounds from what you're describing that they're probably a person with very little tolerance for criticism. People who act incredibly self-assured and especially condescending usually suffer from an ego which is rooted in weakness. So they don't take the criticism very well. So you have to find the right person. In other words, the kind of person that they'll actually be able to hear and to acknowledge this chesaron, to be able to work on it, which means it needs to be the kind of person that they trust incredibly, that they feel that really loves them. And honestly, if you're not that person, I don't think it's helpful to point out that fault because it's only going to backfire. But then there's a third idea, and I think this is perhaps the most practical part of it all. And I'll put this into the form of a question also because I said I was going to ask three questions. And the third question is the best way to help this person deal with his midah ra by pointing it out to him and insisting that he fix it. Maybe there's a way to help that person deal with that midah ra without dealing with the midah ra at all. And I'll explain what I mean. One of the things that the Rebbe has taught us, and the Rebbe has personally practiced to the point of genius, literally, is to take every chesed and turn it around and make it into a maila. Here's a person who's very self-assured, very self-righteous, condescending of others. That can be turned around into a motivation for responsibility. And perhaps the best way to help this person deal with his midah ra, his ego, his self-righteousness, his tendency to condescend or to look at others unfavorably, is to make him responsible, to put in a position of leadership where he needs to worry about other people. And let the midah ra become a midah tova. Let this ego and self-righteousness be used as tools for avodas Hashem, tools for helping other people. Since this person is so smart, since this person is so capable, since this person has such clear views on so many issues, they're in a position to educate others, to inspire others, to teach others. And I would argue that's probably the best way to benefit and to help that person. If you're, in other words, assuming you're truly interested in helping that person, you have to figure out actionably, practically, what is most likely to actually help that person. And I would argue that the likelihood of helping that person by correcting the midah ra is a lot lower than the likelihood of helping the person correct that midah ra by making it into a positive thing, finding a way to use it in a positive way. I heard a story as a bacher yet, about 35 years ago, from a Yid who remembered the story from 25 years before him, or more. It was a bacher in 770 with a very, very large ego. And it wasn't a quiet ego, it was a pronounced ego. Everybody knew wie het van zich gehalten, how highly he held of himself. And the basis for it was that he was very intelligent and he was very well learned, and he made sure that his chavedim knew that he's a Talmud Chacham, which of course is a midah that is not very well tolerated in Lubavitch. And his friends would remind him of how undesirable gaiva and yeshus is in the Chabad culture. And it got to a point where they actually got him to see the, quote, wrong of his ways, and he decided to go into the Rebbe and talk it over. So he made an appointment, and he went into Yechidus, and he told the Rebbe that he admits that he has a midah ra, a midah of gaiva, and he asked the Rebbe for a tikkun tshuva, for a way of correcting it. And the Rebbe's answer is classic. It's classic Rebbe. The Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, Nu, soll chotsch sein mit was? Which means, no, so you're a balgaiva, that's fine. But you should just deserve it. Whatever you think of yourself, be. And I would argue that that's probably the most realistic way to help that person, to turn that gaiva around into something that motivates them to become a greater person. And I think it's very important that we have to be very careful from idealistic negativity. In tradition, if a person has a bad midah, it has to be fixed. It's true. If a person has a bad midah, it has to be fixed. But what is the likelihood of a person fixing the bad midah? And what gains will be made by the person efforting to correct that bad midah? The chances to the first question is very small, and the answer to the second question is probably that they're going to go deeper into the midah ra. Because it takes a very, very healthy person to actually acknowledge that they have a midah ra and try to correct it. And I'm not so sure the person you're describing is particularly healthy. So the Rebbe has taken this approach throughout. Take everybody's chesed and make it into a maila. A person who's showy, good. Mitzvah lefarsem ma'aseh mitzvah. A person who's a balgaiva, good. Empower him. Give him responsibility. And I think that that's probably the best way to help that person.